I guess we'll just kind of go ahead and let them start kind of at the beginning and let us know how things started and how they grew from there, and then maybe after that we'll just have some questions.
Coming out of the turbulent 60s and the swirly beginning of the 70s, and they'd gotten a wonderful dean that was making a stand for Christ again. And he was trying to turn the school around into having a Christian viewpoint, integrate their Christianity with their classroom. And so I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. I said, I'm a PE teacher. I just finished my master's in experiential ed. And you want to start a wilderness program? Right up my alley, I'll do it. So I came here and I got my contract. I was teaching 18 and a half contact hours in phys ed. I was the sponsor of the cheerleaders. That's not me. And I was the coach of the men's tennis team. And I played field hockey in college. I said, okay, here I go. Meanwhile, I have modern dance, folk and square dance, tennis, which was fine, canoeing, backpacking, outdoor recreation and nature study, then first aid, standard first aid and safety. And trying to do all that, order all my equipment, my climbing ropes, all my gear. I said, oh, this is really a big job. And you want me to run this in the summer and you want all this other stuff. And I said, you know, this is too much for one person. The rest of the teachers in the department were all athletic people. And there was a very good department, but they were all into their coaching and their varsity sports. I said, you know what? I believe in what we're doing, but if you have me teaching 18 and a half contact hours, sponsoring, then they gave me volleyball and women's tennis, so I dropped the cheerleaders and the men's tennis we got Don King to do. I said, I know just the person who can really build a program because he is good with a hammer and nail. He knows, he's been in the ground floor at Honey Rock's Vanguard program, and he would be ideal to come and do this with us. So I recommended Jake Wetzel to take over the outdoor, we hadn't gotten a name for it yet, but it'd be like Wheaton's Vanguard, or what's now called Discovery. And so Jake came down for an interview. They liked him. Dean Wilson really liked you. And he and his wife Sarah came to, were you in Howerton first? Yeah. They were the dorm directors of Howerton. And then Jake's other job was building a Discovery program. But first, we had to convince the college what Discovery should be. They were kind of in on the idea of, you know, it's just the rage all of a sudden. We used to call it, what do we used to call it? Stress wilderness camping. Then everybody realized you better take that stress out of there. You know, we were the old outward bound school, but everything was stress outward bound. And we had to convince the faculty and the staff that what we wanted to do was a lot more than just skills, things like that. And so I remember talking with President Vaughn, and he'd say, now why should we even have a program like this? And trying to really convince him what our vision would be, not only for our school, but for maybe the community and growing later. My involvement was basically in the school year, because I was still hooked into Honey Rock, leading programs and working with their programs in the summer. So I taught outdoor recreation and nature study, which was really fun, because I could make it anything I wanted. Because you got outdoor recreation, so I concentrated on the canoeing, the backpacking, the climbing, and bringing my kids all over in nature study. And that was back in the 70s. I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Steve Van Meter. He was the forerunner of the touchy-feely kind of stuff. So I used his books, Acclimatizing and Acclimatization, and we used to run a day program for ACA. Ms. Schuett would bring her fourth graders over, and I'd have them spread out all over campus, basically at the lake, and we'd do lots of things outdoors with them. We called it our Nature Day. And then I taught group dynamics, leadership skills, and those were my input into the rec majors. But right toward the end of the 70s, it really became an in thing for public schools and private schools to have an outdoor ed day, or an outdoor education, where you bring your classroom for a day, or maybe 2 or 3 days. Like the Y Camp, has anybody been to Camp Greenville? You need to take them down to Camp Greenville just to have a look-see at the Y Camp. I've been with both of my kids' 6th grade class over here at Owen Middle, and we have had like a 2-night, 3-day trip to Camp Greenville, and they do a whole bunch of outdoor ed stuff with the kids. So really, it's a good thing going. So that was the beginning stages, 1974. I came, ordered, Paul Petzel and I would get, no, not Paul, but I'd get on the phone and start ordering all this gold line rope and all the other stuff that we needed. And so I got all this equipment here, and then Jake came, built all this great stuff to house everything. And he really took it over from there. Block canoes, remember going down to Florida, getting those Mohawk canoes? Gosh, okay. Lots of stories. But Jake was the one who really started building after that.
So as you can tell, I mean, we've been friends for 30 years longer,
Yeah.
and it's it's been a great gift from God to be able to
Still be
work together and
Yeah. I had Ben as a student.
do what we love. So
Can you believe that? Who looks older, Ben or me?
Don't answer that question. I want that on tape.
So my story, or in God's timing, I was again like Penny working in Honey Rock. That's where we met, and Wheaton College was just starting to. The outward bound schools, it's an educational process. They were just starting to look at it to see if it's something they wanted to get into. And so the first outward bound schools in the United States started in '65. And we were working the summer program, starting to do more wilderness trips. And so then they asked a couple of us if we wanted to go to outward bound to see what they're doing and then integrate it in a Christian context. And so when we went outward bound, we went, wow, there's tons of opportunities for teaching biblical principles. I mean, really, the Bible tells us how to relate to one another, how to work as a group. I mean, it's just, and so it was exciting. And so I was able to be, in '69 is when Wheaton started their first high road discovery, they call it Vanguards, 3-week wilderness program. And so I was one of the, they had 3 groups, I was one of the leaders in the first group. And I worked with that for 5 years.
College freshman.
Yeah, college freshmen coming in, and then started doing training for adults. There's, tons of camps were interested in what was going on. So every May they started a May seminar, which was just for adults. And so, so I was working in those wilderness programs for 5 years, and totally sold on how God can use that experience and change lives and just worship Him. And so it was then in '75 when Penny had Montreat contact us and said, hey, we want to start an outdoor program here at Montreat. And we were like Penny, once Sarah and I came down here and saw the place, we went, yeah, this is nice. There's mountains right at your back door, And so that was neat. How then they offered us a contract to come, and since there was nothing, there was a couple courses, but nothing really going, we had to do something, to start. And so that's why Sarah and I were dorm parents in Howerton our first year. And so that was half time, and then the other half I was given freedom to, we had to write proposals for adding new classes. And whenever you add a new class, you have to go through the faculty and the academic committees and, to get all the approval. And Dean Wilson, Larry Wilson really helped us. If he wasn't 100% behind what we were doing, I don't think it would have went. And so that was he was a great help and motivator through that whole time. But the faculty, yeah, they said, yeah, let's do it. Let's get onto this, and so we were able to add a bunch of the outdoor courses and change some of the other ones, and it was neat. I think there was two focuses at the start. Montreat was a junior college then, and so one of the focuses was if we wanted to have these outdoor classes, then we needed time away to do some day trips. You just couldn't do everything in an afternoon or that, and so for the faculty, that was a big deal back then. Getting excused, to go rock climbing or canoeing, And so we made a bargain, like most of the class. Like canoeing, we could do afternoon trips, on the Catawba, French Broad, but then we needed 2 days, and so we said, okay, we'll do one of them on Saturday, but there's just not enough weekends to do everything. And so, when they give permission for the other day trip to be during a school day, and this was pretty radical back then, but they bought the idea, and so in all the classes we were able to do, use a weekend, but then also started, counting it as since it was a class, counting it to be an excused, during the weekend. So that was a great step. Because we didn't want the skills classes, we wanted them to be meaningful, where you really are learning something. And I think the other emphasis was training students to be able to be leaders. There still is just a huge demand for in camps, looking for people to head up their outdoor programs. Whether it was outdoor education or whether it was their wilderness adventure program. And so we focused on our classes on training the students so that they could go into these camps and be in charge, head them up. And it was great. I mean, we had 5 or 6 every summer, camps were looking for people who were trained to be able to run these type of programs. And so that was our focus, was personal growth, through discovery, and then also training them to lead programs. And
What year was the first discovery?
76.
76.
Yeah. Came in 75, and then spring of 76 was the first.
You'd run it after school, like graduation would be on the first week of May, and then you'd go on discovery 2 days later, or a day later, right?
Day later, yeah. We usually left right after graduation. And it worked out great because May was a great month. You weren't in the summer where there was tons of people, and the water levels were still high, so it's just a great time of the year to go. May was ideal. So it worked out really well. And so that was great. We just enjoyed, trying to do what we could and add. And we started, there was also, have a heart for ministry also, and that is a lot of church youth groups were looking for some type of growth experience, and that's where we started the 1-week wilderness trips. And we had church groups would drive into the gym, and we'd outfit them, and the first night, we'd be out on the trail, and we'd do the backpacking and do a day of canoeing and a rappel in there. And then at the end of the week, we'd hike back in, shower, and they'd be on their way. And so that turned out really well. We had a few summers we were running at least 30 groups, three youth groups every week. And there was a lot of interest. So that's what we were doing, and Ben was here and.
Ben, what year did you
we became
graduate?
friends, and
78.
we felt, God called us to Bolivia to be involved with camp work. And so we left in 84, and they hired Ben to continue on, and we were overjoyed. That Ben was the man, and he took it to new heights.
No?
I'm done.
Okay. These guys, as you can tell, sounds like your interest in outdoor ed and wilderness education was pretty focused, like through your academic career, like you knew that's what you wanted to do.
Well, I taught PE and then it just kept getting narrower. Yeah.
I don't know how, it'd be interesting to hear how young you guys were when you kind of started having that bent toward that type of stuff. But for me, I wanted to work with animals. So I came to Montreat for 2 years. I never took any outdoor courses while I was a student here. Never went backpacking, never went camping. Penny invited me on a rafting trip once, which I loved, on the Chautauqua. And then she invited me to go on a program we used to call Snow Camp, where she would take people up to Wisconsin for a week over the Christmas vacation. And so...
To Honey Rock.
Yeah.
It was great.
But I was a science major, so I was just, it was in the books all the time. And so Penny pulled me out of that. Save me! And really got me interested and started doing outdoor stuff. It's kind of interesting looking back as a kid. I grew up in the city, but I used to read books about Daniel Boone all the time. He was like my hero. So it was in me. It just needed somebody to help me express it, which Penny kind of got that started. So I went on to Clemson when I left Montreat, because it was a 2-year school. I majored in zoology there, and then was going to go from there and work in a zoo and work in a wildlife park or something like that. I went to Africa for summer and worked as a ranger in a game reserve, which is really cool. Great experience. Came back and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be outside and I wanted to work with animals, I thought. And so while I'm doing construction work, as all college graduates do at some point, Jake called me one day and said, hey, why don't you come work for me during the summer? You heard him talk about the 1-week trips that they do during the summer. So I wouldn't know what to do. He said, well, why don't you come and go on Discovery first? Sure, I always wanted to do that, but I never did when I was a student here. So I came on Discovery, fell in love with that whole experience, and then worked for Jake for 2 summers. And then some point in there, I think it may have been at the end of my second summer, a year before Jake had served me to Bolivia, Jake said, hey, why don't you come replace me? And again, I said, well, great, but I don't know anything about doing this. Like, I can put a backpack on and take a group of people out in the woods, but that's about the extent of my experience. And he said, well, why don't you go get a master's degree in outdoor something? And so I said, okay. So these guys had a big influence on me. I just knew my passion was outdoors and my passion was changing to people. God was just showing me that as Jake and Penny have alluded to, is that there's a really incredible experience that can be gained from going out in the woods with a group of people, even if it's just for a couple of days. Just the bonding, the growth, the stress, all of that is life-changing, as it was for me. So I went back to school, and I did a master's degree in 1 year. I doubled up on all my courses so that I could try to finish the degree so I could come and take Jake's place. So I had everything but my thesis in hand when I came to Dean Wilson. And back then, Montreat was the kind of place that, if you were liked, you were in. So I really didn't have the academic credentials or the long experience in outdoor ed, any of that. but these guys knew me and they liked me, and they gave me a break. And so they hired me, and I had to work on my thesis while I was starting out here. And same as these guys, you're teaching 18, 20 hours, and you're working on your thesis, and you're doing this summer thing. So it was crazy. So I was single for quite a few years because my life was my job, and I loved it. And I can remember, I don't know if you guys ever did this, but I can remember sitting down in the gym at 12, 1 o'clock at night, and Brad and I would be down there studying for our class the next day because we had no idea what we were going to do the next day. And then sometimes I'd be so tired. We had this rack that Jake had built with sleeping bags, and I would just fall in the sleeping bags and sleep in the gym. You know, and wake up in the morning, go upstairs, take a shower, you know, in the gym, and come down and ready to go. You know, 8 o'clock class. I'm right there. I did that a number of times. So it was fun. It was a blast. And but seriously, as you can tell, I had no clue how to teach. I had no education courses in college. I majored in zoology, but I had some good examples, and I had a good group of students my first year who just put up with it. And basically it was on-the-job training for me because I had not only did I have no idea how to teach, but I had no idea really what this was all about. All I knew was I loved discovery. I loved what outdoor experiences did to people, and I wanted to be involved in that. So for me, unlike these guys, I didn't have the background in this, but God gave me people like Brad and other experiences that kind of helped get me up to speed in the first couple of years. So I did some outward bound things, and I started doing some ropes course things, and I started doing Knowles. And for me, Knowles is the National Leadership School is a big learning thing for me. Because I went there, you know, and I'm teaching how to do it not this way, but they're teaching how to do it this way. And I'm like, oh, that's much better. So anyway, I ended up, went back to Knowles and took their instructor's course and ended up working for them during the summer when I had time. So I kind of had 3 jobs there at one point. You worked for the college during the year, and then you run the summer program, which is kind of a separate job. And then you go and work for Knowles too, and then occasionally you go and help build a ropes course. So
You
it was crazy.
You did the Cove Camp, the first one.
Yeah, so anyway, it was crazy, but it was fun, and it's the kind of thing that hopefully some of you will experience when you graduate and you go into some outdoor field where you're just passionate. And you know, if there were 1,000 hours in a week, you would spend 1,000 hours doing it because you just love it, and that's the kind of experience it was. Montreat was still 2 years. Do you remember when we switched over? Sounds good. At some point in there, we began to recognize. Well, I was the only person in my department, just like these guys were, in terms of kind of running the thing. And there were always coaches, kind of doing their thing too. We kind of worked together, but we kind of didn't because we all kind of did our own thing. And we began to. I worked with Brad in the natural science department. Lloyd Davis was kind of our head of our department. And so as I interacted with these guys, I began to realize, our majors are leaving Montreat with very little, if any, science background. Ding, 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 the zoology background starts kicking in a little bit, and I'm thinking, we need to pull in more science for our majors, and we need to broaden their horizons a little bit. And we still want to give them those experiences so they can work in camps, etc. But there's a lot of other fields out there. And as I began to work with Knowles, my heart was, I want to get Christians in the secular environment, working with non-Christians to impact people's lives in those arenas, as well as continue to get Christians working in Christian camps. But I just felt like there's this huge arena out there that Christians aren't involved in, that we need to train people to get out there and get involved in people's lives. So interacting with the science department, we begin to kind of toss around this new concept of outdoor education. And up until this point, the degree was called outdoor recreation, and the focus was more so on camping, Christian camping, and training students for that field. But as we began tossing around these ideas, we recognized that there's opportunities with the National Park Service, there's opportunities in Knowles and Outward Bound, there's opportunities in lots of different fields if you throw in that science element. And outdoor education was becoming popular out west in California. It was kind of starting to move east some, and it was popular up in the north and coming down. So we were kind of the last bastion of outdoor educationalist society in the U.S. So it just kind of was a natural progression that we need to move toward outdoor ed. And as we shifted to a four-year college, then that seemed to be also a natural step. Let's bring in more science and education, and let's broaden the scope of this program. So Jay Guffey, who was a student who had now kind of started teaching part-time, and Brad and I, we kind of slowly began to develop some new courses and add some things, and eventually at some point we made the plunge and changed it to an outdoor ed.
We just happen to have a handout. In the spirit of, this is actually a handout that came out in the Reflections magazine a few years ago, and I'm sure they have this on computers somewhere, but we ought to really see if we could get 100 copies of this made up, because it would be a really nice thing for OE folks to have. It's a timeline. Ben did the graphics on this timeline at the bottom, and it's sort of the history of Discovery, the Outdoor Education Department, Outdoor Recreation, and Environmental Studies. And there are 3 different ranges and ridges here that you can kind of see these pathways on, along with some pictures and history of the program. And on the back, there's an article about Jake. There is an article about backcountry and about a student who came back, Randy Olson, who many of you knew. There's an article about our newest student to go on to get a PhD and come back to teach at Montreat College, Andrew. There's an article on Andrew right here. And then there's a history of Discovery as well. So checking my handout, I note that in 1994, it went from outdoor recreation to outdoor education as a group.
So, and that was a real exciting time, because we were adding lots of new courses, and we like every year there was a new course that we had to learn. We were passionate about it, so we didn't care how much time it took us to develop these new things, because we felt like it was what needed to happen, and it was really going to have an impact on students' lives and as they went out to work on other people's lives as well. So during all this transition, we were also continuing to grow these little mini discoveries. We still call the week summer trips Discovery also. And we were finding that we were running into some problems, because Jake had done such a good job of bringing groups from all over the place. We had groups from Michigan and Florida and everywhere, and they were coming down, and they'd get there, at 10 o'clock at night, and they didn't have anywhere to sleep. And they couldn't stay in the dorm lobby, so we just, throw them on the floor in the basement, and that was fine with us. But some of the administration in the college had a problem with that because of health standards and those kinds of things. So we began to wrestle with the idea of we need to grow this program. And, it is growing, and we would like to have a separate facility, kind of like a camp, off campus. And at one time, and you might want to mention this a little bit because you talk about it, but there was a camp that the college rented or owned or
Brandon, I guess.
Little Pisgah. that is still in existence. It was maybe a 30-minute drive from here. And Jake used to run camp out of there. And then I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but that was given back, or we stopped leasing that for whatever reason, and then we ran it out of here. And that got a little difficult, so we began to meet with the administration and see if we could perhaps purchase some land and try to start developing a camp for Montreat, and we would run our program out of that camp and maybe even turn it into a residential camp. So ultimately, that didn't work, and the college basically gave us their blessing and said, why don't you start your own program, and you guys will run it separately from the college. You can take all those groups with you. So that's what we did. So we needed to give it a new name. We called it Backcountry, and bought some property up on the Parkway. Went in huge debt, and made some errors in judgment in terms of finances. And thankfully we were able to pay our bills every month. But at this point, I think Jay was involved, and then there were several others that were helping out. And at one point in there, Jay took over the backcountry program and started running that. And I was just focused at the school. Anyway, so backcountry kind of stumbled along for a little while there, and still had groups coming, but struggling financially because we were kind of a fledgling organization, even though we've been around a while. And we had big dreams, but not enough capital to make it happen, basically. We wanted to keep our wilderness thing, but also try to develop a residential camp. And so at some point, the board that had been brought on for that camp recognized we need to cut our well, we didn't need to cut our losses. There weren't losses. We just need to sell the property and consider coming back to Montreat and see if we can work out. So basically that happened not too long ago. 3 years. Yeah, so I'm kind of jumping ahead of you now. Brad can probably tell you more about that because he was more involved here in that. And then John, who we're very thankful is here, is a big part of getting backcountry going again, and really reestablishing that and growing it. So I'm very excited about that. For me, the best part of this program was discovery. If I could have done, 26 consecutive discoveries in a year, I would have, because it was, you're outside. You're with people, and you're just in a very real situation where God works. Every day you're praying prayers for God to answer because you're in great need, and you see God move, and you see God do some really cool things in that community. So I have a real heart for that program, and I'm glad it's still going, and hope it's around as long as the college is. So I left here in '95, and basically felt like, for me, I don't know that I didn't feel particularly called to anything like Jake was called to the mission field. I didn't feel that. I just knew I'd given everything I had, and there was nothing left. And it was time for somebody else to come in and really take it to the next level. And I was ready for something different. So we ended up doing construction again for a little while, trying to kind of figure out what I was going to do next when we left in '95. And I ended up moving to California, and we worked with the Park Service for a little while, and worked in a couple of camps out in California, which was some really good learning time, and God really used that in our family and our lives. So anyway, so when I left, Jay, who wishes he could be here, took over, and he was one of my students, and so that was exciting for me to see Jay step in, and he just took it places I never could have. And so it's been really, really encouraging for me to see just at every step of this program, God just knew what was needed.
Amen.
So,
It's also very neat just how, Ben was a student, came back, worked for the program. Jay was a student that Ben and I both had in classes, and he came back and worked in the program. Andrew was a student, that we had, came back. That may be Jay calling right now. Just to weigh in on this. There you have it.
It is, Jay.
put it on speakerphone.
And then Andrew was a student in our classes, and he went on, and we're of course really proud of what he's done. It's just funny to see how the threads continue through the years, and people keep coming back that have gone through this program. And it's, as an old timer here who's been here, Ben and I came in the same year together. It's just remarkable to see how God has continued to weave together people in relationship over time through this particular program. And I think it's a real and powerful theme that has been in place for a long time. My story is I came in '84. I came to teach biology, geometry, and college algebra. Shocker. I was a math minor as an undergrad, but I wasn't a math minor as a graduate student, so there were a few issues there. But I had, I could do trigonometry, but I had no idea how to teach trigonometry. And to make a long story short, I went through the first semester as best I could, literally working the problems the night before I walked into the class to teach, because I was literally 12 hours ahead, usually, of the teaching learning process. And at the end of my first semester, I received really, really bad reviews. Horrible course evaluations.
And he got the Teacher of the Year award for the next 20 years.
The bad news was they were deserved. Every single one of them was deserved. And I knew that. And so I found myself in the dean's office at the end of that semester in tears, believing that perhaps I had missed God's calling in my life. I was one of these people who said I would never teach. And I was, like Ben, I was headed in a different direction, at least I thought, before I got redirected. I was planning on working with the EPA and doing research. That's where the focus of my master's was. And then all of a sudden, my lead professor fell ill for 3 weeks. And I had to step in, never having taught before, and teach his intro-level biology class at Appalachian State University. And when I got into that environment, I fell in love with it. I mean, it was like I turned 180 degrees just in 3 weeks' time. So then I thought I had God's calling for my life pretty well mapped out. And during my first semester at Montreat, particularly at the end of that semester, the evaluations were so horrible. And what was bad, folks, was not that they were horrible. The bad things was they were deservedly horrible. I would have rated myself that if I had been on the other side of the desk. And a very wise and godly man who was our dean at that point in time really offered some great counsel. And I just share this story with you because you may find yourself in the same or similar type of place one day. He said, you really need to give this some time. His name was Lee Segrist, by the way. Man, I had a tremendous amount of love and respect for him. He said, you need to give this some time. You can't make a judgment on whether you're fulfilling God's calling, or whether you're in God's calling by what's happened in this one semester. You need to stay with this for a while. You need to sort of follow that long obedience in the same direction for a while and just see. So I stayed throughout the year, and then that one turned into 2. I honestly thought when I came here I'd probably be here for 3 years. And then I'd move on to bigger and better things. And that was 21 years ago. There was something about this place that really kind of grew on me. And I think part of the reason why is because it changed so much during that time. My first discovery that I led, I co-led with Ben. And that was a wonderful experience, and that was back in '87. And it was the first of 10 that would take place, from that point forward. And throughout the '80s, there were a lot of changes taking place. We became a 4-year institution. You heard that, and the associates in recreation became a bachelor's in recreation. And then in the early '90s, we had this wild idea The 90s version of the outdoor education department started on a napkin about this big. And probably the most formative meeting we had was a meeting up in what is now room 300 of the science building on those old lab tables, which now have been reconfigured. And we were just doodling, and Jay and Ben and I were standing up there one night. We sat down and we were just sort of coming up with ideas and brainstorming. And I still have that napkin. So we ought to frame that rascal and stick it up somewhere maybe. Essentially, it's just a triangle. There's not much to it. You look at it and go, wow, these guys were really high tech. Good job. Essentially, it was just a triangle that had God at the top, at the peak, at the pinnacle, adventure education, environmental education, and the heart of that, Christian outdoor education. And that was really kind of the vision. Ben laid out this idea of we wanted to try to develop a program where our graduates would be able to go out and lead people safely and comfortably in the wilderness, who understood group dynamics and leadership theory and could apply all those things, but who also knew something about how to interpret the natural world and who had a strong environmental ethic based upon stewardship principles. A lot of programs at that time seemed to be emphasizing one or the other, but not really integrating the two. So that was a large part of some of our early discussions about the philosophy of the program. Backcountry, Ben already mentioned, we sort of went through metamorphosis during that entire time. We converted it over from the recreation degree to an outdoor education degree. And it started with the first bachelor's program in outdoor education at a Christian college in the nation. And it really started to take off. God led Ben to other things. Dottie came in at that point in time. Jay joined us. Jay was already a part of the department, and then Dave joined us later, and then of course Andrew came in a little bit later. And one of the things you might have missed slightly is we all used to be in the same department. There was one department called the Natural Science. It was called a division at that point in time. Then later they called it a department. So we were all together. Everybody who taught in biology and environmental studies, math, physics, and outdoor education were all together in the same division. And then in, I guess it was 2001 or 2, right around there, there was sort of a move to downsize a little bit, so the division was split into 2 departments at that point in time. So up until that point, we had all been part of the same department, and then we were split into outdoor education department and natural science department, so it was kind of split into 2 fairly recently in the history of the program. So since that point in time, I've seen a lot of changes in the program. My interest really broadened out a lot. I always loved discovery, and I echo everything that's been said about that experience. So much so that when I was choosing a research question for my dissertation for my PhD, which was in environmental studies, I might add, people tell you have to get pigeonholed when you do work in a particular degree. I decided to do it on the life significance of those that have gone through the discovery expedition. And so I went back and looked at folks who had gone on the trip between 1976 and the year 2000 to try to find out if it made a difference in their lives. If so, what was the difference? Was it memorable? What made it memorable? What were the components that really made it significant? Andrew and I during that time were corresponding a little bit because one of the findings that was coming out in my study was that the solo was very important. And so Andrew had already developed a strong interest in solo, and he structured his entire dissertation around solo, as most of you know, as outdoor education majors. And so the threads that have sort of, I guess, weaved all of us together through time just sort of continue. And I could say a lot more, but I'm not going to because you guys may have some questions. I'd just like to say that one of the things I'm interested in is seeing how God continues to weave people, like maybe some of you sitting in this room right now, weave you back into the fabric of this outdoor education program over time. Because that, I think, is one of the most exciting things for us, is to see people that we work with come back in some capacity and just continue to work with the Lord as He calls you here. So, that's all I'll say. And we'll turn it over to the moderator.
Do you guys have questions?
woman starting the whole department, starting everything up. Do you think that it would have been easier than to collect Tom from if you were a man, right?
Well, that's a good question. Some things would have been easier if I were a man. Like Jake could go out and build a climbing wall, or he could go out and build the wall. He went out and built initiatives and things like that. My problem was and they hired me for PE, and then with a footnote they said, start a wilderness program. They had no clue what they were asking me to do, because I was teaching 18 and a half hours of skill classes and then the outdoor rec and nature study and all the other stuff. I think what's illustrated here is what a team Montreat got together. It was amazing. After I came and saw the vision and the scope that they wanted me to have, I said, we need to hire more people. And Jake came, and let's see, we had a really good team. We were a small department, but we were a real tight department. Even with the coaches that were there, we all supported one another. We had a blast down in the gymnasium down there. I mean, they were all for the rec department and our outdoor leadership stuff and everything. Being a woman, it's hard, physically with a lot of things, but you can be a trailblazer. You know, Jake's sister and I started the first Vanguards at Wheaton, and they said, if you can get this group through the wilderness, it was a high school group, if you can get them through the wilderness and don't lose anybody or kill anybody, we'll think about doing it for the college freshmen at the Wheaton women. So we had a real successful summer doing that, and they said, okay, now we're going to start the Wheaton freshman girls on this. And you have to be a trailblazer. I remember trying to buy equipment for women back in the early 70s. So I was up in, I'd go in there, I go, I need a small pair of over mitts. And I'd come out with a pair this big. Or I need a small pair of something, you know, climbing gear or something. There was nothing for women back then. No fancy clothes, or you get your gear and either cut it down or just, you know, trip along. You know, you had those mouse boots up at Honey Rock, those Korean boots, and, you know, army gear. It was really kind of pitiful back in those days. But another neat thread is Andrew's wife was my daughter's wilderness leader up at Honey Rock. I left the department in '82 and got married to a man up at Honey Rock. We lived there for 2 years, and then he was asked to start the camp at the Cove. And so I bought a house in Montreat, never sold it, and we came back down. And then we had kids, and I always brought my kids up to Honey Rock in the summer. And when Jessie was 14 or 15, Kirsten was her wilderness leader for her first big wilderness trip. So, you know, talking about a thread, there's another thread. It was really neat. I don't know if that answered your question, but...
No, it didn't.
But what it is, it's really neat to have a team and recognize each other's strengths. I knew Jake had strengths I never had, but I had strengths he didn't have. So we kind of worked together. It was great.
We had some great women leaders, you know, during the years, and it really had a great impact. So it was very important.
I can remember what Jake talked about, May seminar. And we would take people out that were adults who wanted to start a program like we had people from Africa come, Australia, all over the globe that wanted to get in with this stress camping, this wilderness. And I had a group one time of 12 people, 10 men and 2 women. And they saw me as their leader, and I weighed, 120, and I'm 5'8", and I came, all these burly men. They were going, oh, this is going to be easy. And I can remember at the end, they were talking about just what an impact I as a woman made in their lives, whether it was on solo or just the problems I gave them. I had a ranger that used to be the point man in Vietnam or something, and he was dying. But it was really neat because I couldn't outrun them or, in a marathon or anything. I couldn't outlift them, but I could outthink them. And I could give them problems in a group that they had a real tough time solving. So You use your strengths in different ways. Just because you're not the burly person doesn't mean you can't be the leader. And it worked great.
So what leadership style would you say you took as a woman? And
That's a good question. In leadership style, you know, most of it, what we were doing was non-directive, self-directed learning. But I would, very quiet, very, I don't know exactly what you're looking for, but have you ever led a wilderness trip? Like, what would you say? I mean, that's a good question.
I mean, there's different.
You've got the wind, direction, you've got the tides, you know, depending upon how close you are to shore. You've got all these different forces, and you're trying to tack in that moment in order to keep the boat moving in the same direction by constantly adjusting to that interplay of forces. And I think in terms of constantly reading the group and trying to find out what exactly does the group need right now, what would be best to do in this moment, it just strikes me it's a lot like tacking and sailing. And I think the real test comes when you're that leader standing there with the group and they've just decided, well, we're going to go this way, and you realize it's going to probably take them off course and off route for maybe a day and a half. And you're faced with that decision of, well, let's see, do we let them do this because it's a good challenge and it's what the group needs at the time? But here's where it gets tough. Sometimes you sort of say, boy, we're going to be going down that mountain and then back up, and that's going to be rough. And so you're faced with this dilemma of maybe this is not what they need. Maybe they need something else. Maybe we should encourage them, you know. And so if you're not careful, you can start giving sort of subliminal clues as to the fact that they're going in the wrong direction. And if you're really not careful, you can really sort of redirect the process, which is not God doing it necessarily. It's sort of perhaps something sometimes as leaders we're making decisions and guiding based upon our own comfort. That's a real crucial moment for leaders, I think, is that moment. The group has made a decision. Is it what the group needs in that moment? Being sensitive to the Holy Spirit and deciding whether to go with it or not.
Trying to prepare folks now, grad, or for these folks trying to prepare as students to head out in Christian and secular places out there? Because the reality is, even though you've left the department, what I find fascinating is you still have family members or you've gone on to work in ministry or other areas related to camping and recreation, and so it's not like you left the department and haven't done anything related to the field. Any advice you'd give?
One thing I'd encourage you to do is get as many experiences as you can during the summer, during the spring break, or, you know, any time you have an opportunity to get a new experience or anything like that, do it. You know, it's tempting to want to go back to the same camp every summer that you worked at in the past 5 years, but I encourage you to do something different, because that's going to help you. And the more you see what's out there, the better able you are to minister. The better able you are to see what you're good at and what you're not good at. And know where you need to fit.
And I'd like to encourage you to think outside of the U.S. There's a big need for camping around the world. I visited 2 camps in Spain. One camp, neat camp, they just built a ropes course. They want to, get an adventure program going, and they need people. They need people to know what's going on. Another camp in the south of Spain, they have a camp facility, but they don't run their own programs. They're all church groups and different ones that come in to rent the facilities, and it's a great ministry. But they want to start doing their own, reaching young people through a camping ministry. And, there again, they need people. In Peru, there's a camp. I would love to have people come there and work. In Bolivia last summer, bringing his expertise. So, get a foreign language, sign up for Spanish or French, and
Maybe
they
Chinese.
want us to, when we looked at, I might go to Spain, they want us to do some adventure camps into Morocco. I mean, it's, they do stuff in Africa, India. You're be great for some of you to, get out there.
I think Dottie may probably encourage this, and probably Andrew, but to look at your professional organizations too. It's not called CCI anymore, Christian Camping International. What do they call it now?
CCCA,
Oh.
Christian Camping Conference Association.
They have sectionals, they have regionals. Look at the North-South Carolina one. If you can, go to the national one. That's where you make all your contacts, where you're going to see Christian camps around America and the world. And they have displays all over the place. You meet people. It's a great place to network, as the new words are. Look around. Look at their professional journals, too.
I'd put in a plug for 3 things. One, know the difference between outdoor education as a vocation and outdoor education as an avocation. Have that distinction really clear in your mind, because I think sometimes it's easy to confuse that when you're interested in this field in general. 2, discover what your primary and secondary gifts really are. Those things that when you're exercised and time just passes and you are in the middle of this wonderful experience, because that might be an indicator of where God's calling you and what gifts God's calling you to use. And 3, balance. When you're leading and working with groups in the outdoors, pay attention to the groups, pay attention to the leadership, but also pay attention to encouraging the development of an environmental ethic that is biblically based. Because I think that if we do one and we leave out the other side, we're not really responding holistically to what God has called us to do and to be. So those would just be 3 challenges.